So you says I can call them the space sharks, yeah?
Why did you wait until after we started recording? Yes, you can call them that, since that's what Carcharodons Astra means in Low Gothic.
Oi, yous listen out there. I be Snaplock, and this be Warhammer 40k's Pad History in the Galaxy. Last time Boss Yuksen did a Born Vox on...
Not rock.
I mean, he did a Brainy Vox on the Space Sharks and their origin. And that they and the other bees called Space Sharks are the same clan. That a bit confusing to those listening, don't it?
Here, let me translate this. The Carcharodons chapter and the Space Sharks chapter are actually one and the same.
Thanks. Boss also says when he thinks they become an officio clan. This time he be talking about culture and governance. How that, boss?
I wouldn't necessarily call my last Vox brainy, but as an overall introduction, wasn't too bad. Before we get into the culture, I need to make an apology and disclaimer. First, I must apologize for a mistake I made in last Vox. I stated that the only recorded time somebody got a chance to look at the Carcharodons gene seed was when a Deathwatch apothecary performed a gene seed extraction on a slain battle brother recovered from a massacre site. Now, for those of you who have studied the Badab War, and or have listened to my brother's Vox, The Abyss Awakens, you will note that the current chapter master of the Carcharodons, Shade Lord Tiberos, submitted personally to psychic probing and gene sampling by the Inquisitor Legate's staff. So instead of stating that the only chance recorded was when the Deathwatch apothecary performed the gene extraction, I should have said it was the only one where the results were actually availably noted. I have no doubt that hidden somewhere in the labyrinth of Inquisition secrets is the more accurate conclusive evidence to the Carcharodons' origins. Now let's move on to the culture of the Carcharodons. The Carcharodons' culture, along with pretty much everything else about them, surrounds around their sacred duty to travel empty space beyond the Imperium's borders, seemingly forever, to seek out and destroy the enemies of mankind. Because of this, I'll need to break its culture into multiple voxes. During this particular Vox, I shall be talking about their methods of acquisition for people and resources. Of course, I shall briefly explain how initiates become what they call a full Void Brother. Okay, so recently they have been given a homeworld, but in reality they just treat it the same way as every other world they red tithe, and are still fleet-based. For those who are unaware, a red tithe is when they descend upon an imperial world and harvest the population. The vast majority of those taken would go on to become slaves and serf laborers in the chapter's great fleet, thereby providing the means by which the Carcharodons can continue to function. Meanwhile, the strongest and most promising recruits are taken to be inducted as initiates. Another method that they refer to as a red tithe is when they cull potential initiates from amongst the young of the survivors of their assaults, provided those survivors are human and free of the corrupting influence of the warp. These initiates must be subjected to intensive hypno-conditioning and other harsh procedures designed to strip away any past loyalty, replacing it with the will and attitudes of the Carcharodons. The tithes, however, are not the only means of recruitment. During times of desperation, the chapter have recourse to another brotherhood, one that, like the Carcharodons, had chosen the path of exile, the Ashen Claws. Having allied with neither loyalists or traitors during the Horus Heresy, these former Raven Guard, known as the Ashen Claw, are considered a renegade chapter. Well, at least to those few who actually know they still exist. In the case of the Carcharodons, not only do they know of the Ashen Claw's existence, but also where they made their home. However, when dealing with these outcasts, the Carcharodons have to step lightly, for negotiations with such renegades are tricky at best, and at worst often result in bloodshed. The Carcharodons only deal with their renegade brethren in the most dire of circumstances, especially when their own numbers have grown too thin to be replenished by the red tithes. War material is the currency the Carcharodons have to pay for their harvest of flesh, but dealing with their erstwhile brethren is a dubious undertaking, for a Targatus is a dangerous place. The Ashen Claws do not treat the Carcharodons with the respect they deserve. The Ashen Claws master will often try to provoke the senior officer of the Carcharodons sent to deal with them, taunting, saying the Carcharodons' representatives against each other, seeking to cause them to act rashly, so that their hand in the negotiations will be weakened. I have no doubt the initiates gained from the Ashen Claws, just like those from the Red Tithes, are subjected to intensive hypno-conditioning and other harsh procedures designed to strip away any past loyalty, replacing it with the will and attitudes of the Carcharodons. Now, for these initiates to become a full Void Brother, which is the Carcharodons' name for a battle brother, there are many steps they need to take. First is to undertake certain induction trials that, to the best of my knowledge, remain hidden to pretty much everybody. Next, they must survive the gene seed process and pass their indoctrination. To be very brief, the gene seed process is a series of surgeries, procedures, and hypnotherapy that over the course of years turns a normal human into a space marine. Suffice to say, many fail to complete the gene seed process. If you want a more detailed description on the gene seed process, check out the Vox Becoming a Space Wolf. Now getting back to initiates becoming Void Brothers, the few successful initiates become Scout Marines. When not training with their fellow scouts in the 10th Company, oftentimes they will be attached to one of the Chapter's 9 Battle Company commands, in order to gain combat experience. After being bloodied in battle for over the course of a solar decade or more, they'll begin to earn their first exile markings, jagged tattoos that often spiral in loops up their bared forearms and across their pale shaved scalps. When they're on the cusp of becoming full members of the chapter, they'll eventually leave behind the number designation all scouts are known by, in favor of a true Void name, swapping their gray carapace plates and black multi-weave fatigues for the coveted power armor of a full Void Brother. I have no doubt that most people see the Red Tithe and the Ancient Pack dealings with the Ashen Claws as horrible and cruel. I'd assume even some of the Carcharodons themselves see this as a cruel thing to do. At the same time, they see it as an absolute necessity to keep their fleet-based chapter alive. Now, some of you may say, but the Black Templars don't have homeworlds and are fleet-based, and they don't kidnap and enslave populations. Though that may be true, there's a very key difference between the needs of the Black Templars and the Carcharodons. You see, the Black Templars operate inside of the Imperial borders, and as such, they do not need to be self-sustainable to keep functioning. This is also why the Black Templars chapters operate solely from its substantial war fleet as part of a perpetual Imperial crusade. In comparison, the Carcharodons are constantly beyond the Imperium's borders, which means they have to be self-sustainable. This is why they rely on a much rarer operation strategy known as the Nomad Predation Pattern. The Nomad Predation Pattern refers to an entirely self-contained force that can sustain itself without any Imperial support whatsoever. Predation Pattern Fleet may contain as many support vessels as true warships, or it may contain void ships capable of both combat and maintenance repairs. The second possibility may be more likely in the case of Carcharodons, given the bellicose chapter's propensity for combat. It seems unlikely that they would tolerate vessels in their fleet's ranks that could not hold their own on the battle line. A nomad predation fleet voyages endlessly, pausing only to identify and engage its foes. It must choose its targets carefully, selecting those within its means to destroy without threatening the fleet's viability as a fighting force. Once it selects the appropriate victims, it can descend on them quickly and savagely, engaging and destroying potential threats, or launching spiraling attacks against foes too large to attack in force. The fleet obtains resources from the vanquished foes before vanishing safe from any potential retaliation. Though one cannot be entirely certain that this is the means by which the Carcharodons operate, the tactics do seem to perfectly fit their observed behavior. In fact, there are recorded times where they've been seen as prioritizing and striking resource-rich targets before anything else so that they can resupply. This brings us to their equipment. Now, the common depictions given to the vehicles and equipment during the Badab War were seen as ancient and, in common cases, heavily modified. A perfect example concerning ships is the Nicolor. It has actually been identified as a heavily modified Charybdis-class Grand Cruiser, a class that hails from the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy eras. Examples on a troop level is that many yields the Phobos R-017 Bolter and wore Mark V Heresy pattern power armor. The chapter also seemed to possess an unusual contingent of Terminator armor suits, of which many appeared to be heavily modified or augmented in unorthodox ways to keep them combat-worthy. Now, I'm sure many of you can already guess that much of this equipment comes from their origin, being taken during and after battles, and the ransacking of planets. But they also have another way to get arms and equipment. This would be the Grey Tithes. Now, there are some Carcharodon captains that are given the additional title of Harvester Prime. Beyond the duties of the captaincy of their company, these Harvester Primes are to ensure that the chapter is constantly equipped with arms and equipment. Beyond their duties of the captaincy of their company, these Harvester Prime are to ensure that the chapter is constantly supplied with arms and equipment. They are also responsible for seeking out ancient archaeotech on long-lost worlds that lie within the vast void of the Outer Dark. This acquisition of technology is known as a Grey Tithe. Through ancient pacts with the tech priests of Mars, the Carcharodons trade this lost technology for weapons, power armor equipment, and even vehicles. Although, in times of desperation, the Carcharodons do not always adhere to the tenets of their ancient pact with the priests of Mars, and will often utilize the Grey Tithes as a means of leverage when negotiating with their renegade brethren from the Ashen Claws for the acquisition of fresh initiates. And with that, I hand you off to Snotrock.
Before I give the ending, can I give me thinking on these beakies?
Go right ahead.
I think they beaky death skulls.
Interesting. Why do you think that?
Well, you says they constantly going for loot and gubbins first, and always adding stuff to their gubbins and cruisers and stuff to make them flashier. They have loads more dagger.
Right.
Well, the death skulls do the same thing. They's always going after the loot and gubbins first, and taking it for themselves to build guns and other good stuff, make things more snazzy and loads more dagger.
Well, when you put it like that, the Carcharodons and Death Skulls do seem to have many similarities in their methods of doing things. On the other hand, the reasonings are somewhat different. For the Carcharodons, it is for survival, whereas the Death Skulls just want to make, build, and modify things just for the sake of doing it. Anything else, Snotrock?
Of course there's, boss. There's the ending.
That's not what I... Right! go ahead and do the ending.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this Fox. Next, boss gonna talk about Space Shark's beliefs and strategies. Have a good old time. Until next time, this is Snotrock
And Yuksen.
signing off.